This this is the Impressions Xchange podcast.
Impressions Xchange podcast,
where all topics impacting the graphic imaging and printing industry are addressed via in-depth news coverage, analysis, and timely interviews. Hi everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Impressions Xchange podcast. June marked a very special month for Printing Impressions. It was the 65th year since Printing Impressions launched as a national tabloid newspaper in 1958. Our publication's roots go back to our founder, Irvin J. Borowski. Not surprisingly, a lot has changed over the past 65 years, not only for Printing Impressions, but within the printing industry as a whole. That's why on this episode, I am pleased to hand over the reins to my colleague and editor-in-chief of Printing Impressions, Mark Michelson, who took some time to speak with our former colleague at NAPCO Media and Printing United Alliance, an absolute industry legend, Pat Henry. Mark, who entered the industry as an editor in 1982, speaks with Pat about his experience in the industry when he joined in 1985. They discuss convergence within the industry at large, consolidation, digital versus offset technology, the evolution of desktop publishing, the legacy of the industry, and what we must do in order to bring in the next generation. This episode is a total blast from the past and a must listen for anyone who has been in the industry a few years or those who are brand new and want a little history lesson.
Hi, I'm Mark Michelson, editor-in-chief of Printing Impressions, and it's my real pleasure to have with me today Pat Henry, who is a fellow longtime industry stalwart. Welcome, Pat.
Mark, it's a pleasure to be a stalwart with you.
Same here. Let's start out a little bit. I think we came into the industry about the same time. When did you actually join the graphic arts?
The year would have been 1985 when I came on board as an associate editor for a publication called Printing News that some people will remember from back when. It was a regional publication, and from 1985 to the present day, my focus has been exclusively on the print and graphic communications industry, and in one editorial role or another.
Right. Well, Printing News, I know, really covered the New York metropolitan market, and it was owned by, and I may be mispronouncing their last name, Leo, and I'm forgetting the wife's name, Joachim. Was
Leo and Florence Joachim? Yeah, that's
Joachim.
right.
Was he deceased when you started there? Or was he still active?
He was semi-active. Leo had founded that publication in 1929, so it was it was a long-standing publication when I got there, and Mr. Joachim, I think, had another year or two before he passed, and Florence continued to edit and publish it, and it was sold to a friend of Leo's, the publication of the publisher, I should say, of Playbill, the theatrical publication that still exists, and it went through another ownership change after that. But I was with it. I would say probably in one way or another through about 1995. The chronology gets a little bit hazy. I went to the publishing company that acquired it, and it was bundled into a network of regional and specialized graphic arts publications. And I continued with it until 2002, when I, became an independent, a freelance, a consultant, a hired gunslinger, whatever, however you'd like to describe it. But since then, my focus has, as I said, always been on print and graphic communications. I've been in other industries, but this is my professional home.
Right. Well, I know you also were director of communications at NAPL at one time, and you worked for What They Think, and you worked for NAPCO Media before you decided to go into semi-retirement.
Well, thanks for mentioning NAPL, and NAPL or the vestiges of it are part of what we now know as Printing United, and the trade association aspect of the industry, along with its trade publishing aspect, has undergone a lot of what the industry itself has undergone. That of course is consolidation. So I suppose no surprises there. And as an independent, I have written for or edited for, I would say, most of the major trade journals in the industry. Some of which, I should say, most of which are not here anymore. But it's been my privilege to work for all of them, and
Right.
not least of all the NAPCO publications, which, as you know, I had the opportunity to serve full time from was 2017, I guess, through 2021. So that took me into retirement. But as I hope people don't get tired of hearing me say, it's a semi-retirement. But on some days, the semi is a lot bigger than the retired.
Right. Right.
So, and
Yep.
there it is in a nutshell. But Mark, I think you mentioned that my timeline is pretty parallel to yours. What's your chronology?
Well, I joined NAPCO in 1982.
Hmm.
I got hired on Package Printing Magazine, which is now called Packaging Impressions.
Right.
But I got hired there as an assistant editor, and back at that time, the assistant editors were also the ad production managers. So I had to track down the films for the ads from the
Wow.
and keep
Okay.
track of that. And so that gave me kind of a different perspective to that side of the business. And then I moved over and I was made editor of two publications. One was called Worldwide Printer, which was distributed
Hmm.
outside the US. And our main correspondent was a gentleman named Pincus Jaspert,
Yeah.
which is a name from the past.
Yeah.
And that published on an every other month cycle with another magazine we had called El Arte Tipográfico, which was in Spanish. And I was the editor of that publication, and I don't know Spanish. So I had to prepare the content for a given issue, send it out to and get it translated, and then get it typeset. And then the galleys, I literally had to proofread letter for letter because I didn't know the language. So God knows what kind of grammatical errors or things. But El Arte Tipográfico is a very old publication which competed with Artis Graphicus. And then I moved over to become editor of package printing and did that for a couple of years. And then in 1985, I took over as editor of Printing Impressions. One thing I found fascinating was that we were covering the printing industry, but we were also living the developments in the industry, as it was happening. I mean, we both were involved, doing repro type, making up mechanical
Yeah.
boards and, waxing machines. I remember coming home, I would have type stuck to the bottom of my shoe and on my elbows. And we had an art department, with people standing there at the art table with the T-square and X-Acto knives and, and just
Mark, you make a great point about evolving with the technology, because we had to use that technology. There's no surer way to date yourself than to talk about mechanical paste up and watching film strippers do what they do. But think about what happened when you worked on your first word processor, as opposed to what you used to do, which was having someone else set the type for you, format it the way you wanted, and leaving it to you to work out the fine points. I still can't. I do believe it, but I almost have to pinch myself a little to imagine what it would be like to proofread copying in a language I didn't know. But
yeah,
my head is off to you.
that was a challenge. But
I remember working with a typesetter in Lower Manhattan for printing news, and business still exists in a very different form, but its specialty was converting all of the various typographical and imaging formats that existed before we had PostScript. And I think at one point, this firm advertised that they were able to translate 700 or 800 of them. And, that was a tower of Babel that went away almost overnight when we learned, how to make, machines talk to other machines. And I shouldn't say we, because I had no part in the development of that technology. But as you did, we had to learn to use it pretty quickly. And I think that's that's one thing that's kept us engaged. And you mentioned it before, just the pace of change is just so relentless, and it's to me it's fascinating, and that's what keeps me hanging in, even in even in semi-retirement.
Right. Well, when I started in '82, the typesetter we used was still using hot metal, believe it or
Oh
not,
yeah.
which
Hmm.
was even
Yeah.
outdated at that point. The company went
Yeah.
out of business, mainly because their operators were retiring. They couldn't get the replacement parts for broken down machines.
Yeah.
And then we switched to another typesetter. I still remember when we used an outside typesetter called Another Way, and when they came in and they showed us some type wrapped around like a photo. And I
Yeah.
remember being there
Hmm.
with some other editors, and we were just like looking at it in awe, like, oh my
Yeah.
God, you could like wrap type around a photo,
Uh,
It's like,
I took years ago, many years ago, I took a course in Quark Express, and the instructor had a story similar to that when he said when he first came to that application and when he saw that Quark could do an automatic type runaround around an image, he said it was then I knew that the world was changing, because prior to that, that would have been a painstaking manual process, and you probably remember using an X-Acto knife to cut up lines of type to either to fix widows or orphans,
right.
or to wrap type around. So it seems like a small thing now, but it was it was revolutionary then.
Right. Well, Quark Express was, I think, introduced in 1987. So,
Mm.
we've certainly come a long way. They, as a company, I think they kind of lost their way, and Adobe InDesign kind of took them over.
Yeah,
But
that's
at
right.
one point, Quark Express was the kind of the de facto standard.
Right.
So as we kind of grew up with the industry, so to speak, in the '80s
Hmm.
and '90s, I think it was fascinating to me. Well, first of all, I think those were some real heyday decades for the industry. Um, I think the print industry was the fourth largest manufacturing industry.
Hmm.
Um, many of those years, everybody was making money.
Sure.
Um, no expense spared. I remember going to print shows that
Yeah.
filled the entire McCormick Place complex.
Oh gosh, yeah, the old Graph Expos.
Right. And so we're able to live
Hmm.
those go-go years, which was also a very exciting time. Um, but we talk a little bit about the change in page production, um, and then desktop publishing came along,
Yeah.
and we saw that really wipe out an entire industry in the typesetting industry.
I hate to compare it to what happened during the the medieval bubonic plagues, but it was almost as swift and it was almost as thorough. I was with Printing News in a New York City-based publication at the outset of the desktop publishing transition, and I would say that within 5 years, and 5 years is probably generous. Most of the trade typographers in New York City were either gone or had to find other things to do simply because there was not enough typesetting work anymore.
Right.
And, there was a furor initially, you probably remember, oh, well, if it comes from a desktop and it's not 300 DPI, it can't be real type. But the market had other ideas. And, that's not the only example of the market making a decision about a technology, rather than the end users. And it was a shock that a lot of people didn't recover from, but that other people took a lesson from. And the printers that are still with us today, the ones that we can remember, back from the years you rightly described as a heyday, are the ones who've adapted and, who've never, you know, clung to technology just because it was what they were comfortable with or because it was what they had fully paid for.
And pre-press service bureaus was another
Oh golly,
entire
yeah,
industry that kind
yeah.
of
Hmm.
went away as
Yeah.
printers were beefing up their own electronic pre-press operations, and
Sure.
I remember sending out, we'd get color separations, and
Hmm.
companies specialized in that. And even
Yeah.
when we'd have our covers done, and we would have them produced by these pre-press houses that were charging us, they had these SEPs systems, if you remember, those
Computer electronic
$1 million
pre-press systems. Yeah.
systems that now could be
Yeah.
done with a
Right.
inexpensive computer. And they were charging us $1,500 to do a cover, which back in
Yeah.
that time was a lot of money.
To anyone listening to this podcast who's baffled by these references to desktop publishing and SEPs and so forth, would recommend a visit to Frank Romano's Museum of Printing. And I've forgotten the name of the town in Massachusetts. It's not far out of Boston. So if you're
I think
ever
it's
up
in
that
Haverhill,
way,
Massachusetts.
yeah, that's
I
a
was
Haverhill.
actually
Yeah.
there
Yeah.
fairly recently, and it's quite an impressive place. And to me, though, the biggest treasure there is Frank Romano himself. And
Oh yeah, living treasure, no doubt about that.
but I
Yeah.
highly recommend that people go there and visit, because it really is just like a time capsule
Yeah.
of the developments in the industry. But we've seen other changes. I think it was in 1990 that Xerox launched the Docutech.
Oh yes. Oh,
And I always viewed Frank
yeah.
Steenberg of Xerox
Hmm.
as sort of the father of the Docutech.
Yeah.
And then in 1993 at the IPEX show,
Hmm.
Indigo showed the
That's
ePrint
right.
1000, and
Okay.
AGFA had the DCP-1 Chroma press.
Oh,
And
that's right.
that
Do you
really,
remember a device called the ElectroPress? I think that preceded both of those. I think it did only three colors, two colors plus black. Can't remember the manufacturer, but
I kind of remember the name, but
yeah,
I do remember being at IPEX and
yeah,
going to that press launch of the
right.
Indigo. And if I remember right, they couldn't get the press to work. I think it wasn't necessarily a press, but they had some kind of like finishing attachment on it that didn't work. So
Okay. Yeah,
it didn't quite go as smoothly, but um, certainly Indigo, and
yeah,
at that time it was owned by Benny Landa, and then
right.
HP, and then Benny started Landa, but it's come a long way. But one of the things that always was fascinating to me as we saw the advent of digital printing,
Right.
but it seemed to really catch hold a lot slower than many of the industry pundits said it would. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm a big admirer of Charlie Pesco, and he had the
Hmm.
On Demand show, and Barb Pello, and um, but I don't think that their prognostications of how fast digital printing was going to gather steam in the industry didn't really
Yeah.
happen on the same timeline that I think
Right.
that were telling us it was going to happen.
Because for a while it was a technology in search of applications, and the initial demonstrations were wonderful. You could see your name traced in the foam on a cup of espresso, and things like that. And personalization, while it's turned out to be hugely important for applications like direct mail and documentation. Doesn't seem to have been as compelling as a marketing device as we might have expected. Now, I can anticipate getting a lot of pushback for that statement. I'm not saying it wasn't relevant, but that always puzzled me a little bit. I mean, if it could put my name and my picture and my variable information anywhere on the page it wanted to go, why wasn't I seeing more of it in
Right.
the direct mail that I was seeing? And there was a lot of uh, excitement at one time about trans promotional documents or trans promo.
Yeah.
Your credit
I
card
remember when that
statement
was a
would
big
have the.
word.
It was, and again, it. Not saying that it never happened, but just not on the scale we initially expected. And I guess that's just a another reminder to, no matter what the technological breakthrough is, just temper expectations. And,
Right.
I think that also applies to the adoption of production inkjet. I mean, as successful as that's been, I think we can, both remember from the first few inkjet summits and other events that, there are projections about the number of offset pages that are going to be overtaken by inkjet pages that, may happen, but hasn't quite happened yet.
Right. But it is definitely moving along.
Oh, it is. Yeah, no doubt about that.
But getting back to the digital printing, I think one of the things that slowed the progress too, though, was that the customers didn't have the databases and didn't have the data drive that personalization of the capabilities of the presses. And it's still an issue, but obviously it's gotten a lot more sophisticated, and the presses, what they're capable of doing, has become a lot more sophisticated. But one other area that we saw, and I guess we're getting a little out of chronological order here, but we saw the advent of computer to plate.
Don't want to forget about conventional.
And that was a huge movement in the industry. And I think printing impressions, I think, believe it or not, actually played a small role in that we inducted a gentleman named Jonathan Ward into our printing impressions printing industry Hall of Fame one year. And he worked for R. Donnelley. And at that time, when we did our Hall of Fame banquet, we had suppliers present the award. Well, Mark Michelson, no relation to me, who was the CEO of Creo, was trying to get to Jonathan Ward to sign off on acquiring a bunch of CTP devices. And that banquet where they sat together at the same table, where Amos presented the award, and that ended up R. Donnelley committing to several CTP devices, which R. Donnelley was, at that era, was kind of the technology leader. And then once R. Donnelley committed, several other firms sort of followed suit. So I do think we played a small role in the development of CTP.
Well, talk about a disruptive technology. Think about what the adoption, and the adoption was pretty quick, of CTP did to the major film producers. Kodak, Agfa, others. Again, it didn't happen overnight, but eventually there was no longer need for graphic arts film, or at least not the need that had existed previously. I'll never forget the first time I saw a multi-unit offset press load plates into all printing units simultaneously, with one press operator, basically there to check to make sure that it had happened correctly, without all the manual setup that used to be the case. And I think it's just important not to forget what progress has been made by offset lithography in about the same time frame as we're talking about here. In 1985, it was still, the wet, messy, unpredictable printing process that it had been, probably for 50 or 60 years. But with the advent of, digital controls, and when we've mentioned CTP, the ability to precisely set every function on that press, from ink fountains to suction to air pressure as the sheets travel through the presses, the appearance of onboard inspection systems. It turned offset into a very, very stable process that started to get more economical in smaller quantities, because the process was becoming more automated and therefore requiring less make ready. And, those economics are very important. So I'd like to give a shout out to offset. We could say the same about a flexography as well, which, began life as, crude would be the wrong word to use, but, no one seeking top print quality would, want to do anything on a flexo press that isn't true today. That also has become, very, very predictable, stable, and high quality method of, getting printing done. So just a shout out on the conventional side here while
Right.
we're talking about digital.
And we've seen, and this isn't necessarily a new phenomenon, but with the automated offset presses like you're talking about, a printer will get rid of 3 or 4 older presses,
Yeah.
install one automated press, and
Hmm.
that's more productive than all that older equipment combined. Another trend we saw, certainly, it's throughout our careers, really is the whole industry consolidation trend.
Yeah.
Um,
Hmm.
Sometimes it's hard to keep track of who's on first. There's been
Yeah.
so many acquisitions, consolidations. It seemed like there was a period where, we had these very active consolidators out there.
Yeah.
Certainly Joe Davis, Consolidated Graphics,
Right.
Mayo, some of the
So
other
yeah.
ones,
Yeah.
several consolidators that failed,
Hmm.
frankly. Um, but and we do have some today still,
Yeah.
but I don't think of the scale that we saw, during certain periods of time. What do you think about the impact that has on the industry, and if that trend will likely continue, what impact it will have going forward?
Well, there's good news and there's bad news. We'll start with the bad news. Loss of establishments, leads to loss of employment. Those are never good things. It may leave some regions of the country deprived of printing services that they didn't used to have. On the positive side, it addresses what's been a chronic problem in the business since you and I began covering it, and that's overcapacity. Too many cylinders chasing too
Right.
little work, or maybe now we would say too many nozzles chasing too little work. So if consolidation addresses overcapacity, that's healthy for the industry. If consolidation makes it easier for the acquirer to serve not only his existing base of customers, but the base of customers he or she has acquired, then the customer base benefits. So it's there's pain and there's comfort to it, but I mean, at the very least, you would have to say that it's a natural process in any
Right.
mature industry. You mentioned Senbeo a moment ago. We both know Paul Riley very well. Paul, of course, was CEO of Senbeo during its high watermark as a consolidator, and he points out today that uh, buying groups among printing companies make consolidation on that scale less necessary. So perhaps the trend to consolidation has run its course, although printing companies are still buying other printing companies and selling themselves to other printing companies. So this isn't something we're going to see the end of.
Right. Well, one thing though that's been sad from my standpoint is there were so many mid-sized successful
Yeah. Hmm.
printing companies that were driven by these incredible entrepreneurial,
Yeah.
in some cases family businesses, but
Yeah.
um, you know, private individuals that,
Yeah.
so many of those companies have gone away. And I mean,
Hmm.
these were such dynamic people that
Yeah.
drove so many of these companies. And now, the trend that we've been seeing is um, companies being acquired by private equity. And, from my standpoint, I think it's a positive that it
Yeah.
gives the selling ownerships an exit strategy, because,
Right.
as we both know, a lot of times, the children don't want to take over the business,
Right.
and they're aging out of the industry, and they're looking to exit, and, private equity is willing to pay good
Right.
multiples. But I'm nervous about the long-term ramifications
Yeah, I
of
think I see where you're going. Yeah.
where that's going to impact us, because the model of private equity typically has been, you
Yep.
buy a company,
Hmm.
you maybe build it up, make it more profitable, and then
Right.
you flip it. So they're not really long-term players like, what we've traditionally seen in the industry. I have seen that private equity companies are willing to invest in new technologies, and
Right.
they're addressing the automation issues, the
Yeah.
labor shortages. But if you're not a long-term player, I just don't know what kind of impact that's going to have on our industry.
I think the PE phenomenon is not old enough, or hasn't. We just haven't had enough experience of it to know what will happen longer term. At some point, as you say, the model will require that these platforms that the PE investors built up will have to be flipped. And I guess the first question is, well, whom to? Who is
Right.
we know who the flipper is, who's the flippee, and what is going to be the fate of the company in that transition. It's been positive in that, as you say, it does give owners an exit strategy, although interestingly, not necessarily an immediate one, because private equity investors tend to be industry outsiders who will need the selling principles to continue in a substantial role for a period of time, just to make that transition a success. But you're right. After the original, personnel are no longer there, and after the private equity has added what I part of, and again, I don't know really enough about it to analyze it as closely as I would like to, but is not part of the private equity model to use a lot of leverage, okay, to increase, size and customer base. I mean, what happens to that, debt once the company gets flipped? I mean, what does that do to the long-term prospect of the company? And again, I really don't know. I'm not sure that anybody does, but it's something we're going to have an answer to, probably within a few years.
Right, right. Well, and we talk about investment and
Yeah,
investment in automation, and that's
yeah.
certainly
Oh, yeah.
to address what I think is a huge perplexing issue
Mhm.
in our industry is the lack of skilled labor and the lack of young
Yeah,
people coming in the
right.
industry. And
Okay, I talk to printers about this all the time.
right, and I will,
Yeah,
put an asterisk by that and say that
yeah,
I think it's impacting all manufacturing
yeah.
industries. I don't
Mhm.
think printing is unique. I do think
Yeah,
we have somewhat of a disadvantage given the
yeah.
public misconception that printing
Mhm.
is a dying industry, and
Mhm.
mass media that's kind of
Yeah.
positioned us that way, certainly doesn't help. But it's a problem with no easy answers.
Well, Mark, as I say, I continue to speak with printers for various things that I'm working on, and sooner or later, automation and labor issues are going to creep into the conversation. There's just no way they can't. I think printers do see a bright side in automation in that it lets you operate with fewer people, and those people don't necessarily have to have the skills of the people who were running the old equipment and who are aging out of the industry, retiring. So that certainly is one benefit, and automation may be even more significant for printing in that if it's done correctly, it takes so much cost out of the manufacturing process. And one thing I think we can agree hasn't changed over all of the years we're speaking about here is, margins in this industry, are still thin. In certain
Right.
categories of work, they can be better than in other categories, but there's just not a lot of profit to be made on an average printing job, which means that if you don't take cost out, you don't operate profitably. And I think that is the chief benefit that the printers, at least that I've been speaking with recently, perceive in automation. Okay, can we eliminate a redundant step? Can we not have, two people looking at it and only pass it through to one? Can we,
Right. And
can we,
not only is it
yeah,
a cost savings issue, but it's a
yeah,
speed to market issue, which,
yeah, that's right. Yeah,
everybody wants their job yesterday.
yeah,
So, anything that the printers can do to
yeah.
speed their workflows. Um, but I personally feel it's going to have to happen at the grassroots level
Uh-huh.
to get people to join the industry. I know we've both reported on Mariano Rivera and some of the things that he's doing, which is
Yeah,
wonderful in terms
right,
of trying to bring underprivileged youth into our
right.
industry.
Yeah.
But I do feel that it's going to have to be at the local levels where printers are just going to have to get involved. Um, with their local schools,
Right,
mentoring,
right,
whatever it takes to just try to,
right.
one by one, kind of attract people to our industry.
Mark, I couldn't agree more. As it happens, last year I wrote what amounted to a white paper for the Print and Graphic Communications Association. That's one of the former PIA affiliates, and it was about that recruitment and retention. And I spoke to a lot of people, printers, educators, consultants, and by the time I was done with all of the conversations, that was coming through loud and clear. It has to happen at the grassroots, and you use a variety of solutions. You work with your local vocational programs, BOCES, if there are apprenticeships, in every state in the union has an apprenticeship program, probably in need of updating for printing, but these can be explored and applied. They're doing that in the state of Pennsylvania pretty successfully, and in other places as well. It's always been my personal belief, and again, all due praise to the Mariano Rivera Foundation for what it's for what it's doing to bring people into the industry. I'm going to give a shout out to a group I'm working with here in the New York metro area, the Graphic Communications Scholarship Foundation. The Print and Graphic Communications Scholarship Foundation on a national scale. I think we've probably learned over time that a national or an industry-wide push on this is probably going to have only limited efficacy.
Well, and I know that Printing United Alliance, it gives out scholarships, and it also has launched this iLearning Plus, which is
Yeah, it's a
a
great collection of
online
yeah, it
training
is.
program, and there is
Hmm.
like a introduction to the graphic arts,
Yeah,
and they keep adding more programming. So that there are
yeah,
tools out there to um, help train people, but we still got to get them in the door. Um, get them hired. I am seeing more printers do a lot more
yeah,
cross training
right,
of the employees they do have,
yeah,
to make them more valuable within their
right.
operation. So,
Mark, you probably know that I was a university lecturer in graphic communications for actually a good number of years at various places, and I was fortunate to have the opportunity to bring class groups to printing plants here in the New York, New Jersey metro area, and I will never forget watching the lights come on in these faces and minds when they enter a printing plant, and they see what happens there. They see the sequence of events, they begin to grasp the process, and if there were a way we could encourage more printers just to bring more young folks into their plants. And I know that's not easy to do in a busy printing plant when there's limited time to spare, sometimes no time to spare. But if that were done on a larger scale, I think that would go no small way to improving our recruitment. I mean, it's a wonderful industry, it's a wonderful technology, but it's under a shroud. I mean, it always has been. It's just something that the general public is not going to have any detailed knowledge of. So we need to be a little bit more demonstrative, a little bit more forthcoming in our outreach. And I know that
Right.
you and I would be happy to facilitate that in any way we can. But
Definitely.
that's certainly one key to it. Just bring some kids into your plant, and good things will start to happen.
Right. I guess it's just kind of a closing question, and I'll give you kind of my comments, but
Yeah,
I'd be interested to get your perspective is just, we've been in this industry both, over 4 decades. What we like most about it and what's attracted us most to it. And I think you would agree with me that what I've been most enthralled with is really just the genuineness of
oh
people.
gosh, yeah.
Um, there's not people I found to be very down to earth. I
Yeah.
found printers to be very open and sharing
Mhm.
information, and oftentimes even with their competitors, because I do
Yeah,
think
yeah,
as Andy Paparosi's phrase,
yeah,
a sinking ship or a rising tide lifts all
yeah.
boats. So I think it's just been a wonderful industry in terms of just the type of people that have been in it and still are
Mhm.
in it. You don't find that in a lot of other industries.
Oh, Mark, that's so true. I've had exposure to other industries, and I think I said earlier, I never met a stuffed shirt in the printing business as I had in other industries. I mean, printers are wonderful people. They're the salt of the earth, and I say that without any hesitation or embarrassment. I mean, it just amazes me and humbles me even to this day how willing they are to speak with me. I continue to interview printers as I did for so many years, and in 8 or 9 cases out of 10, they had no idea who I was. Okay, they
Right,
might they might have been familiar with the publication or the media outlet I was working for, but they didn't know Pat Henry from the Man in the Moon. But we're willing to open up. We're willing to answer my questions. Certainly not disclose everything, but in most cases, more than I really had a right to expect. And uh, that generosity in sharing knowledge, and that lack of pretension, and that willingness to help. It's just been a joy. It's just been a
right.
joy. Yeah,
Well, I see that, when I go to the Inkjet Summit, and I'll see
yeah,
two direct competitors in a
yep,
corner, comparing notes and sharing
hmm,
information on what's worked for
yeah,
them, and what investments they would recommend to each other. And it's
yeah,
just wonderful to see because
yeah,
I do think we are all in this together.
right,
And to me, that's just been such a remarkable and
yeah.
endearing part of being a part of the graphic arts industry.
Mark, I have a closing question for you, if I may. When you and I first joined this industry, certainly when you first joined PI, there were many, many more publications in the graphic arts space than we have today. I mean, most of them have just ceased publication. What do you think is the secret of printing impressions is longevity when so many others have just disappeared?
Well, that's a good question. And there certainly were some wonderful publications. I mean, for years
Mm,
we battled it out with American Printer, Graphic Arts Monthly,
yeah,
um, and then there was High Volume Printing, and certainly then all the regional publications that you
yeah,
mentioned earlier. I think one thing that was successful for printing impressions was that we tended to be very people oriented. As you recall, we always
yeah,
put people on the covers, we profiled successful companies, we talked about, when we interviewed them, we talked about what made them successful. Um, and, what I found is the secret sauce was very different in a lot of
mm,
cases for different companies. There wasn't
yeah,
necessarily one recipe that worked for everyone. But I think that, when it's all said and done, an industry is made up of people, and I think we had a very strong focus on people. We tended to also be directed a little bit more toward the mid-size and larger printing companies,
yeah,
not so much the quick print shops and the franchise
mm,
shops. And there were publications that catered to that market.
mm,
But also, frankly, we were owned by the Borowski family,
Yeah.
and the founder of Borowski was a printer himself, and we acquired several publications, packaging, implant, different publications, and as a company, we were just more committed to the industry.
Absolutely.
Graphic Arts Monthly and American
Yeah.
Printer, they were owned when they were shut down. They were owned by these large multinational conglomerate publishing companies
Yeah.
that didn't see a future in printing.
Mhm.
Whereas our company really, that's what the company was really all about. Yes, we did have brands in some other fields, but really the core of the company was the printing industry. So I think, there was a higher level of commitment, which, certainly helped. But, I know some people have asked me like, oh, you must, be glad those publications don't exist anymore. And frankly,
Yeah.
it's a total opposite,
Yeah. It's kind of lonely.
I think they were all wonderful publications.
Mhm.
The press corps, we were a community. We traveled together.
Yeah.
We commiserated together. And, I think it's a shame that there's not more publications covering the industry. Really, we're down to two. And,
Yeah.
it's I don't see any new startups happening. Obviously to send out a printing publication with the cost of paper and printing and postage.
Yeah, God.
Our circulation numbers are, we were close to 100,000 back when we were battling it out with American Printer and Graphic Arts Monthly, and advertisers were looking at BPA statements, and it was a numbers
Yeah.
game.
Yeah.
But I think it was those factors. I think our focus on people, the commitment of our ownership. I think those were the two key drivers as to why we're still here today. And unfortunately, those brands don't exist anymore. But there were some wonderful editors. Roger and Estroza, Bill
Sure.
Essler, Jill Roth, Catherine
Yeah.
O'Brien.
People I still look up
So
to.
many more that contributed to knowledge sharing in our industry, and it's sad to see them not part of it anymore.
Well, Mark, it's pretty clear that that commitment to the industry and identification with it continues to drive printing impressions. So that's the correct answer.
Yeah, well, we just celebrated our 65th anniversary.
That's right.
In our June issue, and it's a milestone. Not too many publications reach that, but I think hopefully for many more years to come. But Pat, it's always a pleasure speaking to you. We've known each
Likewise,
other,
Mark.
seems like forever.
Yeah.
And the camaraderie that has existed between us all these years, it's just been wonderful.
I want to thank Mark and Pat for taking us on a trip down memory lane. I will include links to some of the things they discussed, including the one to the Museum of Printing. And finally, I want to thank all of you, our listeners. Stay tuned for the next episode of the Impressions Xchange podcast.